Welcome, everyone. My name is Jacob. Thank you for joining me. This is Hunt Detail, and I do want to thank each and every one of you that have jumped to the new feed. Really appreciate it. Was previously on a different feed, but this is the feed we'll be on for the foreseeable future. And it's an exciting time of year. It can be an anxious and stressful time of year for sure, because I think we start to see pictures of big bucks falling and we're like, what am I? There's a party and we're missing out on it. And obviously, it if we do overdo it, um, we can really be frustrated and ruin this season. And so the best that you can do is really the best that you can do. And I just want to encourage you to not um, let it, social media and big bucks falling and all that stuff be a hindrance or to frustrate you and make this season sort of anxiety filled sometimes. And the reason why I say this and a lot of things that I say on this podcast is that it's really directed at me, and that's really some of the things that we'll be talking about today, or some notes to myself, if you will, and hopefully you find those helpful. Before we get into it, I do want to say that you can now use the code DETAIL at redmond.life.com. They have Relight, the electrolyte mix, zero sugar. They have the real salt, and then they have the Wasatch seasoning, which we're going to start giving away in November. So next week's podcast, we'll go into that. Um, Most of my giveaways, as you know, everybody wins something. Even if you don't win this Wasatch seasoning, steak seasoning, you're going to get something else. So, um, also use the code DETAIL at Trophy Rock, and you're going to save 15%. So, 15% on any order for the redmond.life.com Trophy Rock, 15% code DETAIL. And then also, lastly, DETAIL at Raw Rev protein bars. They're awesome in the stand. Save 20% on your first order. So, also, please, 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 when you get a chance, go to whatever, if you're listening on iTunes or Spotify or whatever, and give this podcast a 5-star review. Greatly appreciated. It helps this podcast reach others, and really appreciate your support. That's the only way other people get to know if this is something worth listening to, is if you give it a 5-star. So really appreciate that. So wanted to get into some of the, I personally have been doing a lot of pre-rut whack-a-mole and just bouncing around to different states, different properties, public land, private land, this state, that state, another state, trying to get a sense of what's going on, when the rut fires up, where do I need to be, and is it fired up already? And in some cases, I have found great amount of sign and had great encounters with bucks. And in some cases, I'm not seeing any sign. And this is certain pockets that I'm used to seeing sign in. And so, I need to do more work there. And I stretch myself a little thin this time of year because I am trying to fill multiple tags across multiple states. But it only lasts like 6 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever. And I really want to do that. So I have some random notes that I took in my phone, and I'm going to go through them, and it's really just notes to myself, and and hopefully though you'll find them helpful. But I think one of the things is, first, be a woodsman, not a cameraman. And the reason why I started with that is I think about my trail cams. Some of them have shown me nothing, and what I have found when I got boots on the ground is that, oh, the sign's there. The scrapes are there. The rubs are there. I just didn't set my cameras up very well. And this is an area that I've set cameras in before, and it's worked really well. I've had great coverage, that sort of thing. So I would not rely on your cameras to tell you what's going on. And certainly, if you set them up in areas where there's high traffic and get a sense of the inventory, I have seen a lot of small bucks cruising, a lot of some still bachelored up. And but I think that, as we've talked about before, it's you're looking through a keyhole, and when you have boots on the ground, you're actually opening the door. I also have here, don't hunt dead deer. And I've been guilty of this where I killed a nice buck in a particular location, and I'm like, okay, well, here we go. And that's part of the process when we get locations. The deer age out, but we understand the history of that space. They might like the terrain or a certain food source or whatever. Maybe it's some sort of like an apple tree or something like that. That's always going to be a magnet, or maybe it's a certain pinch point or something. But I think sometimes we think about what happened and how it happened, and we think that we can replicate that again. And so I think it's important that we're really letting the woods tell us where to go and where and when to hunt, where to hunt, that sort of thing. Um, One of the things that I would say as we keep moving forward on my list is the scout, 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 scout hunt. I mean, really, yesterday morning I hunted, great encounters. Yesterday evening I went to a different state, different piece of public, wanted to scout it, and I just did a big 2-mile loop because I didn't want to hunt it, but I wanted to get a sense of when this gets hot, where do I need to be? Um, so I really think, scouting it, and it kind of goes back to that don't hunt dead deer, because the deer, the acorn mast shifts, crops shift. There's different food sources, different pressure, different deer. They just have different ways that they use the terrain, and so you need to scout, and then when the woods tells you to set up, that's when you set up. And maybe it's a strong rub line and a scrape, or maybe it's a really big fresh scrape. Um, those sorts of things. So I have here that 400 yards is a world away, and I think sometimes we can get in an area. Maybe we think it's great, but we're just not micro tuned into that spot, especially early season when there's still vegetation, still leaves on the trees, and you're kind of like you can't really see what's going on 400 yards away. And so it really is, if it's not working, if it's not working where you are, it doesn't mean the rut's not happening. It just means that it could be happening a ridge over. And so that's why it goes back to, really being mobile. Don't be afraid to, if you're getting late to your stand, if you're going to be late, maybe something at home, you got to take somebody, take one of the kids to school, and unfortunately it blows up in your morning. I would say that not to let that ruin it, that it's an opportunity. Obviously it's an opportunity. I've had this happen a couple years ago where something happened. I got in the woods late. It was actually an opportunity, and it was an amazing day. Um, and I killed a great buck, saw an even bigger buck a few minutes later. That was kind of weird, but and unfortunate, but it it was used the opportunity in the woods to scout, to understand, and to understand where the rut is going on specifically. Another thing a couple other things. One is every hunt, I believe personally, is a setup for a future hunt. So a lot of times I'll go, I'm like, well, I'm not expecting something to happen per se. I hope it happens. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this trail camera. I want to scout this little section here, or I want to set up a camera. I'm looking for scrapes or rubs, and it just helps me continue to stay motivated, even if I don't see something. If it doesn't work out the way that I want it to. It's always about learning, not necessarily about the objective. One of the things I would say is visualize your shot, and I'll say this. I would take, especially now, after the past few years, I would definitely take a 30-yard broadside over a 15-yard underneath the tree. The shot angle's different, the awareness is different. I've been so guilty of setting up exactly where I think the deer are gonna be and almost trying to cover every base. So it's like, oh, I wanna set up on the pitcher's mound so I can have access to every base instead of setting up at second base where I only have access to a shot at third and first. I guess my point is that sometimes I've set up, well, not sometimes, many times I've set up where I'm trying to cover everything and the deer come out right underneath of me, and it's difficult from a movement standpoint or noise or both. And I personally have to do a better job of that and visualize it in a way of like, yeah, you know what? If they come out over here, I'm not going to get a shot. But if they come out here, which is what I think, it's going to be 25 yards broadside, and I could move and I can draw and I can and get a full broadside shot instead of a downward angle steep where you're like maybe hit one, 1.5 lung. Those hard angle shots really are tough, and I've had several of those, and I don't want them anymore. Um, I would say really we've heard this before, but just focus on the journey and learn. I sort of alluded to that earlier that I'm setting up every current hunt for a future hunt. I would say don't be afraid to bump and dump. I mean, you've heard this. Some folks will bump a buck out of his bed or bump deer and then really kind of set up in that spot. And I've had that sort of work before where I've done that, had that buck come back in. He didn't fully commit, and that was partially my fault because I was moving too much or something. But but that can work, and I would say like don't think that the hunt is over when you bump deer because it's they get bumped all the time. I mean, they really do. They get bumped all the time from they don't know necessarily your intentions. They get bumped from just people, maybe biologists or folks that are with the state agencies, maybe hikers, maybe bird watchers, maybe coyotes, other hunters, whatever. But I would say don't get too discouraged if you bump deer because anything can still happen. I will say though, I've seen it firsthand where I, I had a group of does come through. They came underneath my tree. I should have shot one of them, but I didn't. They, they, they finally figured out that where I was, and they busted out of there. And I guess they do leave a scent from their it's between their I can't remember the name of it, between their toes or between their hooves. And I had a buck come through a little bit later, not a big buck, but just a buck. And he picked up on that scent almost immediately and turned right back around. It was really interesting. But again, I'm just saying in a general sense, just because you bumped deer doesn't mean the hunt's over. I would say, for myself is to use my glass. I really want to start working as I scout. I want to be hunting and I want to use my glass. I don't want, I would love to be able to come up on or to see a bedded buck or to see a buck feeding or to see some deer feeding before they bust me. And I think I often am either trying to read sign on the ground. I don't bring my glass sometimes because it sort of gets in the way from a saddle hunting perspective, but I think I really want to use my glass. I would say let your cameras soak. Think about obviously I have cell cams and I have SD card cams. And I really want my SD card cams to soak because I'm trying to build up insight and inventory for new locations, other locations, um, locations that I might come back to excuse me, later in the season, if maybe, into December, excuse me. And so I'm just trying to gather as much intel, and I just want those cameras to soak and sit. And I would say don't blink because this will happen very fast. And if you can, I would say try to get a hunt in many times each week. I mean, I think last week I went almost every day on some at some capacity. And again, it's all about learning, it's all about setting up for future hunts. Although that's sort of you know, a hunt is a hunt. I'm hoping to fill the tag, but if I have the mindset of it's for a future hunt, then it's even if things don't happen, it's like, yep, I learned something there. So it don't blink, it goes super fast, and it's obviously can be magical. It can be a lot of fun. I would say lastly is that in the end, we are chasing these experiences. We're chasing. Last year, I grunted in a buck who was like, I don't know, 50 yards, 60 yards away from me, had some does underneath of me. They took off as soon as I grunted. He thought that was another buck chasing. It wasn't. It was me. He came into 30. I had prearranged a spot and shot him perfectly broadside through the lungs. He didn't, maybe he went 40 yards. And it was great. It was an amazing hunt. He was a 130-inch class deer, out of state, public land. And I just look at that Euro mount, and I just think, man, that was a fantastic day. And we're chasing these experiences, but at the end of the day, when this is all said and done, I genuinely do not want, and this is maybe a little bit morbid, but I don't want what this to be brought up at my funeral. Maybe a little bit, but I really want him to say, hey, you know what? He was passionate about his faith. He was passionate about serving his family and being a leader and a provider and a good husband and a good father, a good friend. And oh yeah, he liked the outdoors a lot. That's really what I want. And so I just want to say that sometimes we can get very obsessed, and we can make these successes and failures part of our identity. And at the end of the day, these things, these antlers that we collect, they're just going to be sold or auctioned off or thrown in the trash, or I don't know what's going to happen. But I know it's not going to be like, man, look at that. That was amazing. Dad did this, this, and this. And it's like, yeah, I highly doubt that that'll happen. Maybe for one thing, maybe one of my elk or whatever. But ultimately, it's really these experiences that we're chasing, and uh, no one's going to care about it when we're dead and gone. But what people really care about is how we served and loved. And so I just want to encourage you in that capacity, because again, things can get very myopic at this time of year where you're seeing all kinds of big bucks hit the ground. And I certainly have seen it, and I certainly get like, oh man, why can't that happen to me? And it can, but we have to keep it all in perspective. So there you go. Best of luck. Thank you again for your support, and we'll talk again next week.